Hello, in this video, we're going to be talking about passive transport. Let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking passive transport, there are some super important things right off the bat that we have to talk about. Okay, and the number one is that no energy is required. No ATP molecule has to be used in order to make this happen. No energy is expended. It happens naturally, spontaneously. Water moves through the membrane. Oxygen moves through the membrane. Carbon dioxide moves through the membrane. Ions in open passageways, open proteins move through the membrane, all based on a super important process or concept called the concentration gradient. Now, the concentration gradient is going to be the most important thing to grasp in this process. Things move through passive transport from the area where they are to the area where they're not. Okay, they move downhill. This picture here below me, passive transport, the ball rolls downhill. That's the concentration gradient. In other words, the ball is completely at the top of the hill, 100%, and it moves to an area where it's not. Okay, think about how you make a glass of tea. Okay, you get your tablespoon and you put it into the jar, get some of those tea grounds out, and then you put it into the water. At that initial moment when the grounds enter the water, they're all together, but they don't stay there. Okay, it begins to spread out to all the areas of the water inside the glass. Now, we stir it up just to speed up the process, but you really wouldn't have to. You don't have to. If you just wait, eventually the entire glass will be brown, just like it is for a glass of tea. Now, I can't promise you that it'll have the same concentration everywhere, but it will spread as it's supposed to, as in a natural fitting, and that's diffusion, but that's passive transport. Diffusion is a part of that, as you can see to the list right beside me there. Okay, but no energy is required, and it moves with the concentration gradient. In other words, from where it is to where it is not. This process is also why you can smell a skunk from over a mile away. When that skunk initially sprays, all the molecules are together right there where the skunk is. But over time, especially with the help of the wind, those molecules spread out, and eventually, half a mile away, you can smell the skunk smell. We live in essentially in town, but it's on the very edge of town, in a rural town, small town. And just about half a block down from our house is a cow pasture, and so we get smells from that all the time, good and bad, and we can get the skunk smell every once in a while. And so, but that's all passive transport. No energy is required, moving with the concentration gradient. And I mentioned diffusion. There's also facilitated diffusion. That's things moving across the membrane based on the concentration amounts on either side of the membrane, but with a little help. It's a little protein involved. Again, it's an open passageway. When we think facilitated diffusion, we want to think about maybe a highway that runs through a mountain. Excuse me. Anybody can go through. The tunnel is always open, and just things move through as they need to. But when we'll talk about facilitated diffusion, but we're going to talk about channel proteins, ion channels, gated channels, carrier proteins. They all deal with specific situations And again, facilitated diffusion will have its own video along with diffusion and along with osmosis, which is one of the trickier concepts to master. But no energy with the concentration gradient. Okay, so the rest of the information about specific information that we need to know for this is the idea that polar concept with the phospholipid. Again, it's super important. But with passive transport, these are small molecules, but that if they are a charged, if they're a polar molecule as well, like water is, things like that, then they would be attracted to those phosphate heads, and that would pull it through. But the main thing to recognize is that it's all about the amounts. If there's a whole bunch of something outside of the cell and there's not very much inside the cell, then it's going to move into the cell, trying to equal those out, create that equilibrium, 50-50 on the outside, on the inside. So passive transport happens all the time. Okay, if they are, we'll just say 22 element compounds of salt outside the cell, and there are 4 inside the cell, then some of those salt molecules are going to move inside. If we've got a total of, I think I said 20 and 4, so 24 total, then enough to get that 12 and 12 will move across there. So it's just a constant exchange of molecules. If there's 16 oxygens inside and there are 3 outside, then some of the ones on the inside will move outside, trying to balance out. Okay, so passive transport and diffusion specifically tries to balance out the amounts. And that's going to be different than what osmosis does, and that's why it's a tricky concept. But we'll talk about that during that video. Well, that's our video over passive transport. The next time we come together, we will be looking at diffusion. So we'll see you then.